I'm live. It's me. Welcome to Conversations on Spirit and Soul. I'm trying to get completely have a little bit of light, but also be in the sun. I'm just from my bedroom this morning, and I wanted to get us started with some grounded questions. And in this live today, if I'm looking, it's because I'm looking at my notes on my phone. I'll let the sunlight back in a little bit. I have a story about these earrings actually that I'm going to be sharing and why this matters so much to our topic today. Remembering who you really are. Um, and today we're going to discuss what it means within we currently live in. And that can be really, really difficult. I know a thing about it or two from being in a very bicultural home in my upbringing. And what does that mean? Well, it means our ability to thrive, find joy, and be filled with gratitude. Many people who have supported me along the way. Today's topic is this topic for a reason. I've actually gotten questions through the years from people about not only my work as a cultural psychology researcher, but then I've gotten questions as to why don't you believe the same as you used to? And I think that this is common for so many of us, especially as you get older. And one of the resources I want to pull on for today for our conversation on this, as we also discuss why self compassion is essential for our growth, for our own self leadership. So often when I talk about leadership, it's not just because I'm a former K-12 teacher and principal superintendent. No, it's because we have to first lead even get into leadership roles, we have to understand elements of leading ourselves. And there's two different texts I'm going to pull on a little bit in the conversation today and try to keep us at around 18 to 20 minutes here for this particular live. The first text is Edward Casey's Spirit and Soul. This first edition was published around 1991, and a new edition came out, a revised edition came out in 2024. So I'm reading from page 259, and he says, but still remaining on earth, earthlings we are, as well as deathlings and timelings, what remains for us to do? Many things, of course, but one of these and one of the most essential is to remember our lives psychologically. A most effective way of doing so, according to archetypal psychology, is to revert to the gods in all of the senses of reversion examined earlier, or to put it another way, to liken our lives to theirs and theirs to ours. So often I've found through the years in my own studies, in my alongside of Yeshua, that I we are not very good as humans at being okay to just sit still. I don't think that that's natural for a lot of us. And I will give a caveat. I was specifically born into a United States context. That's not my ethnic lineages. That's not what I claim even nationally. It hasn't been for many, many years because often we are calling ourselves something that the world has created. And when we keep doing that, or we look for the support or the inclusion, I've done it myself many times in my life, of a particular group that has been defined by the structures of man, we miss out on the depths of who we are. And that brings me to our very first question. We're going to have three key questions. I actually put 5 in the description if you want more for journaling. I will always list the questions. So if you don't like to listen or watch, that's okay. If that's not your thing, or you don't like to read the Reflective Edge newsletter, you can always just look in these show notes of these particular lives. Always going to drop the key questions. There will be no other like, hey, go take this, go do that. Some of the other episodes, you're going to see promotions because they have guests and they might be sharing a book or their website. I might be sharing some stuff that I've put out, research studies, etc. But here on the Conversations on Spirit and Soul, we're really just going to talk and have conversation. And I'll then just share with you some of my own questions, whether I've journaled them, whether I have just been pondering them and I voice memo them to myself, but I will always share those in the description. So if you're like, no, I'm done, then just go get those. So the first question, though, that is, and for me, this actually goes back to being 4 years old. And when I was 4 years old, we actually lived with one set of my grandparents. I have a unique story in that my mother's lineages are Amish Mennonite, my father Puerto Rican, my grandfather one of 27 children from the island, and my family migrated. Our patterns of migration were to Chicago in the United States. So here I am, almost 8 years into this lineage of my grandfather coming to the States from the island of Puerto Rican. So all that to say, we stayed with them, my father's grandparents, for a time. I grew up with a set of great grandparents on my mom's side, as well as grandparents, and then my grandparents on my father's while. Got to spend a lot of time with all of my grandparents, and it was such a beautiful experience. It was also such an enlightening experience, I think, as a child, because I was reading by the age of 3 or 4 and would treat and spoke to us in conversation talk in a lot of ways because my grandparents were entrepreneurs, were business owners. So they didn't necessarily treat us babies in that way. And we often would hear very normal conversations about business, etc. That's not everybody's experience. So that's why I put it out there, because I've done work through the years to then also examine when I've been in these modes of feeling sorry for myself, which is essentially not knowing who you are, or I've been in patterns of anxiety where I'm trying to over control my future or what happens or who's involved or all those things. I then miss the mark of being free to surrender to the will of God, the great creator. And that's when it becomes pretty selfish in our faith journey, I think, as far as this conversation on our spirit and our soul and remembering who we are. So I'll just say I'm going to transform us and transport us back into my 4-year-old self, laying in the grass of the yard behind my grandparents' house, which I loved, had never seen anything like it. And I remember and have this core memory of this beautiful summer day, just laying in the grass, literally on my back in the sun, and then on my stomach, and literally pulling through the blades of grass to be looking for a four-leaf clover. I was interrupted by my one of my parents screaming and yelling at me. It was my mom. And when I speak and write about my parents, my father's still alive, thank God. My mother passed tragically about 4 years ago. This has been a whole journey of healing for me because there were so many things I kept suppressed as a child. And part of that was how my mom taught me, because that is what she knew. So I say this to say, when you're speaking about parents, or when you hear me talking about parents, grandparents, family, it's not because I'm bashing them individually or them collectively even. It's because I'm using myself as an example to explain my context and show you these are the steps that I took and these are the type of context and things that I experienced. Take what you can if it's helpful. So it's not because any two walks are exactly identical in the human experience. However, when we all boil it down to understanding us as humans, there's a few key things we can rely on. And those are what we can remember from our children experience. So our childhood experience from 0 to 8 years old. And also our ability to accurately tap into who we actually are and our own identity found in our soul purpose, not our identity imparted to us upon the world when we're birthed. So that leads us to the next topic, the next kind of question and point of conversation here. And part of that, when you hear the word remembering, for me to even pull back that memory from some of the other traumas I've experienced then, from teenager to in my 20s, and now as a 41-year-old woman, and then been in this career life of capitalism, because that's the culture that so many of us have been birthed into, is capitalism. Not all of us, but a lot of the globe right now, and I'm in the millennial generation, a lot of us were birthed into capitalism and this hyper awareness on performance and outcomes and productivity. And that's very, very hard So growing up, the next question we have to ask ourselves, what are in your life when you felt most like your true self before the world told you who to be? The reason why me laying in the grass, looking at the sky, being in this state of bliss stands out is because as soon as I heard my mother screaming for me, my baby brother has been born, he was less than a year old, I hadn't heard anything. I was in this total state of like my own world, being at complete peace, and that being disrupted. As I ran because my mom said they were leaving me, I still have a scar from tripping on that sidewalk. I can show you and point to exactly where it is to this day if I were to go to that house. And I remember just blood coming down because I had really scraped my arm pretty bad. And I get into the van that we had at the time. My sister was in there, my baby brother was in the car seat, and then my mom was in the front. And I remember her face and her emotion. And that is one of the first times in my life I was able to pinpoint with a therapist when I was told not to cry, that I was being sensitive, and that nothing was wrong with me. I had blood dripping from my arm, right? My mom is also a new young mom and under 30 with 3 children, all under the age of 10. Okay. So I'm also painting this picture of my mom didn't know certain things about herself very well. I know this from being around her all the time. But I also say this as a part of my own journey because I have been filled with rage through the years too, from learning a taught behavior of don't show people that you're hurting. Don't let out those tears. Don't be a baby. Don't. And when you're a child who's deeply sensitive, like I was, and I am still a very sensitive person, we take those moments to heart. Um, take those moments to heart. And so, sorry, I got a notice about this live stream. And this is like my first live stream on YouTube. So I hope it works out. But the things that started to, when I peel back those layers of understanding, and you might say, well, that's not that big of a deal, Justine. In theory, it might not be, but it was something that came out for me after years of journaling and attending different types of therapy modalities, working with all types of people through the years on my own healing journey. And it might sound really trivial. You might want to hear me tell you about different traumas I've survived. I don't think so. We all have trauma in our lives, and you don't even have to put it on a scale of like, oh, they've been through more. Oh, they've been through less. That is actually what the function of capitalism does. And then it's wrapped up in constructs like racism and gender roles, all of the cultural norms. So this brings us full circle. And I want to denote this text called Sacred Tension from one of my colleague friends, Andrew Pitts. He's a great pastor and just somebody I've known a decade now, but he just came out with this book. And one of the things that he denotes, and this is on page 51 of his text, Sacred Tension, is hurry, the enemy of formation. Now, I have to tell you all too, one of my struggles, and this is from the time I'm a kid, so I've also traced this back to that, and it was something I saw my mom and my grandma really struggle with, was anxiety. And I have been a proponent of that, right? I think capitalism makes us more anxious. I think that even in our generation, like I was a first college grad, but there was so much pressure, even though like in my setting, I was told you have to pay for college. But society and culture were saying like college or die, literally. So the reason why the area of cultural psychology research was because I had always deeply wanted to know and understand why it wasn't enough. Why it wasn't enough. And I was raised in a very fundamentalist church and taught a lot of biblical teachings in a lot of very positive ways. You are to feel shame for who you are, not to differentiate and understand because we're unstable. It's trying to reconnect. I hope you get this for you. We often get caught up in beliefs that are imprinted upon us in those formative years, and we don't even know why we believe what we believe. We don't even know then why we're following the cultural norms, but I'm here to tell you today, you're not a bot. You're not AI. I love the tools that can help us with work efficiency for those reasons, to get in touch with ourselves and focus on us and our own healing processes. But the reality is, until we differentiate those two, that we have been productized, that the function of our public schools in the United States in particular was to build a workforce and also military, that those are truths we have to confront. And no amount of us going, but this news channel said that, nope. But this article's, nope. I'm not even telling you like you need to believe or agree with me or these books. I'm saying we have to examine each of our own journeys. No one can do that for you. No one. So let's read a little bit about what Andrew said. And he said, hurry, the enemy of formation. Our modern world doesn't know what to do with formation. We live in the age of methods and metrics, KPIs. Give me the steps, give me the strategy, give me the formula. We approach God the same way, but the Holy Spirit does not submit to our systems. In our hurry to produce outcomes, we often confuse movement with maturity. We know how to serve sermons and run programs, yet many believers quietly confess, I know the motions, but I miss the wonder. And we can fill in any fill in the blank religious tradition around the world, by the way, created by man. Religions are created by man. As men and women, man, we are flawed. However, we have access to the authority that Christ has been imparted to us. That is available to all of us. Formation cannot be rushed. You cannot microwave holiness. You cannot schedule encounter. You cannot hurry the Spirit. And this I wanted to read too, partly to tell on myself. This has been one of the biggest realizations. So 3 years ago, I used to get very, very frustrated with metrics and the metrics games, especially coming from very high stakes, high performance turnaround K-12 education settings. Especially being a person who is Latina myself, who was very young in the space that I went into. There will always be reasons we can convince ourselves that we are not worthy to be in a situation or a space. Be any number of reasons the world will have us believing we're not worthy. So one of the very simple things, and it has to do with these questions, and I want to make sure we've covered those 3 questions, and we'll end with this 3rd one. How have culture, family, or faith shaped what you thought you had to be, and what are you unlearning now? Because of what was elevated in a lot of the church settings I was in, as well as cultural themes. It's not just my household, you all, in the United States in particular is the context I'm speaking to, of the 80s and 90s. Graduated undergrad in 2006 early and moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, would become a teacher, then became a principal in Chicago public schools. Here we are. Okay. So we all have these progression paths in our lives. And as Andrew D noted, are we looking at the movement and the motions, or are we looking at maturity? And are we looking for a slow roasted oven solution, but we really only want to input microwave inputs? What are we really going for? So all of that to say, with this final question, let me read it back again. It's in the description. If you need to click off for any reason, how have culture, and culture is our norms. I talked a lot about norms and beliefs today. Norms, beliefs, values, the symbols that we hold dear to us. The necklace that I always wear with a prayer that has Archangel Michael. I believe in the power of angels and archangels. But that's a symbol, right? So a lot of times we do these things and we have to even check our own psyche. I do the same thing. And I have to sit with myself and go, if you weren't given your name, if you weren't born in the time and place you were, if you were not Pablo and Renee's daughter, if you were this or that, if you were none of these things, Taino, Puerto Rican, Irish, Moroccan, Spanish, whatever the modern day names of these regions of where all my DNA is from, okay? If you have not stripped all that away, even down to your name, if you weren't, because those are things we're given by humans. And for a reason usually, and a lot of times not a reason. And sometimes we make our own reasons, like I have through the years, of why we want to be devoted to that name we've been gifted during our time on earth. It's really easy to look at the collective of your life or a project, and I denoted this podcast, for example, and frustration at times. It's important to look at, to zoom out, We are selfish by nature because it's a survival mechanism. We want to survive as a species. And the more that we can get in touch with how these things like our upbringing, our cultural beliefs, how we operate in the world, our faith, and how that shapes us, what should we be unlearning? And for me, it has truly been elements, not all, but elements of capitalism and enoughness through that lens. And I've gotten to the place where I ask myself, okay, well, if that's what you did today, who's judging you? And if it's you, Justine, why are you judging you? So these things creep in all the ways, and I'll end with my earrings, as I said I would come back to. These are a way for me to still push myself to grow, show up in ways and in spaces that I want to, as a speaker, as a writer, as a podcaster, as a person creating content on YouTube or with video, right? And I said, what are the things I love? What are the things that people always notice about me, but also most of all that make me me? And one of the things I loved doing growing up, and was a way to lose myself in those laying on the grass moments and find just Justine and be just alone with the creator, was to create jewelry and beautiful things. So I've always been very good with beading and yarn and different things like that. It helped to grow up with grandparents for craft things, for sure, especially those who had come from the Amish. So that is why I also love gardening. I love permaculture and how that's being introduced into a lot of my leadership programs. So I've had to find ways to really decapitalize and rather decolonize not only my spiritual walk through the years of my life, but and to really connect with God, but to also peel back those layers of my thinking where I go, well, that's not good enough. Oh, well, you could never do that for a job. What? Who told you that, Justine? And catching that voice when it tells you what's possible and what's not. And there's a difference between being realistic and assessing yourself and what your gifts and talents are and how you want to show up versus just allowing people to tell you who you are. And that's what we all fall into. If we become so caught up with money and noticeability and visibility and fame and all these things that so much of capitalism pushes us into without us even realizing that we've been programmed that way from the time we're born, whether it's through TV, songs, etc., whatever. Until we sit within ourselves, that's what I identified as a kid. It was either nature or creating, like with jewelry. It was nature, and then the notion of doing something that I want with nothing to prove to anyone, not a dollar to make off of it, and solely for the art of loving what I was doing. And so over the past year and a half, I've intentionally sat with and even had weeks as a consultant and speaker inside. I'm going crazy like, oh, there's something else to prepare. There's got to be more to prepare. Okay, well, let me look at this. Let me look at the next thing. And the Spirit continually saying within myself, and the Holy Spirit saying, hey, even ancestors, right? And that's part of my practice, another life for another day, but nudging and saying, why? You're provided for, you have enough, you love who you are, do the things you love and are passionate about. So by doing that, here's what happens. I tap into my love of different types of earrings. It's one way my students always drew me. I've been known for wearing big earrings since I was a kid. I've always loved big hoops, big earrings, statements, and I love collage art and storytelling. So what better way to not only do great pieces for friends, which I have over the years anyways, but to really make a splash and make me, what makes me, and have custom earrings for any time that I'm on camera or that I'm on a stage someplace, no matter how big or small, but to denote and go back to that little me. And it's taken some really rough lessons. They have felt really rough. I'm sure we all have been in those seats. And it's taken some big enlightening moments, especially in my 30s, of being devoted to a path. And that is even how I changed the name of this podcast a year or so ago, was like, okay, yes, you have a framework called cultural capacity, Justine. You have all these little frameworks. And nothing is new under the sun. I'm saying that as a researcher. There's not. These are concepts of living and understanding human suffering, the capacity of us humans to come together, overcoming our own prisons that we've created. Bob Marley says, one of my favorite quotes of all time, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. So I think that's where we find a lot of ourselves right now in the world, is finding these things and not trying to make it like, oh, I've arrived, I've decolonized. Oh, I'm an anti-racist, I've decolonized. It's not even like a thing to attain or like some badge. That's exactly what the structures of capitalism, meritocracies, racism, patriarchy, they all they want us to continue in that lie, in that brainwashing of, well, you'll be good enough if. You'll be enough if. You'll be happy if. And that is not the formula of the divine. There is more than enough available to those who ask, believe, and really believe. That's the kicker. Because I have gone through spots in my faith journey where I've definitely said and thought to God out loud and asked and implored, why? And that's still me doubting. That's still me having a level of doubt. And I'm not telling you that's good or bad. I'm owning it and sharing it in my own journey, because I don't typically have that doubt. I didn't typically have that doubt even as a child. But we'll get into more remembering. But this is, how do I remember who I really am? And the 3 core questions that we did discuss, you can find all 5 in the description. I thank you for anybody who tunes into this Conversations on Spirit and Soul. Add your thoughts in the comments, add your ponderings, your aha moments, etc., your own strategies. I am doing this because I love to fill my toolbox too. It does not matter that I'm a cultural psychology researcher. It doesn't matter different things I've even done in my walk. What truly matters the most to me is that little being who is so perfectly at peace and in bliss, just being in nature, just creating what she wanted to create, envisioning new worlds. And that might sound really silly. I'm getting worked up because I work with so many school leaders specifically. I work with a lot of executive leaders globally, but specifically K-12 school leaders through the years. And it's what I come from, so I know it well. And we are constantly apologizing for choosing what's best for our journey. And that includes for children in the schools we lead. And that is a function underneath it all of empire, because that is not what we're on earth to do. We're not here to use and abuse others so we can get ahead with our own selfish things. The questions that we have to sit with that can be really challenging when you're birthed into capitalism, when you're birthed into these oppressive structures, is to say, how would that thing or that amount of money or any of this stuff, that title, whatever, how would that possibly make me more happy than what I am now? And if I'm not happy right now, or I can't be grateful right now, how on earth do I think that that would somehow magically make it? Now, perhaps it might make your life easier. There's some funny movies about this, right? And like how, oh, money does make you happy or whatever. But that is the lie of capitalism. And capitalism is very individualistic, just like a white supremacy mindset. Okay. Those are very, cut from the same cloth. They're about controlling people, shaming people, period. And religion has is a man-made thing that is like that. So that is also why I wanted to name these special lives Conversations on Spirit and Soul. We to wonder, to have imagination, and to really tap back into the essence of who we are. That requires peeling back the layers and being humble enough and okay enough to say, oh my goodness. Because then the next thing is when you find out something new in your journey that you didn't know before, and you feel like I've been lied to my whole life, whatever those things are for you, the real trick is not staying stuck in that shame and guilt spiral, because shame will have you believing that the deepest parts of you, who you think are most broken, are not lovable. And therefore, you're going to magnify that into constantly being in that shame and guilt spiral. That is why religions are so effective. That is why government and capitalism are so effective. Why? What do you feel when you go out to start your junk car, but your neighbor got a new one? What does social media constantly do? Okay, it compares, because that's how the human brain is naturally wired. So many, 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 many people, the globe around, are awakening and coming out of centuries of what's been a lie and what's been told to them about who they are. And many, many, many of us have been putting in work to really go, this is not how I die. This is not going to be my life, regardless of what's been told to us or presented to us. We are saying, no, I am who the I am says that I am. So I'm glad that you are here. Can't wait to see you till next time.